And I've just got a bunch of questions of my own, and
Perfect.
if anybody's got any questions and wants to chip in at any point, please do. It's very casual and informal.
Yeah, that's great.
There's no fire drill scheduled for today, housekeeping wise, so if the fire alarm goes off, please don't use the lift. And I think that's everything. Let me just check this is... Yes, we're good. Yeah, I'll sit down. Thank you so much for coming. Honestly, it's lovely to have you in.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah.
I imagine you're mega busy at the moment, so we really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
But just by way of introduction, Dr. Elizabeth O'Connor is an award-winning writer from Birmingham with a PhD in English literature, and Whalefall is your debut novel, which was selected by The Observer for top 10 debuts of 2024, which is dead exciting.
Very exciting.
And I've seen you on between the covers as well, which is amazing.
Yeah.
How was that?
That was fab. Yeah, really great experience. Yeah, really nice.
Brilliant. So how would you describe Whalefall?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's always funny doing these events when it's a really sunny day. You're always like, oh, is anyone actually gonna? But yeah, it's lovely to see people here. Yeah, so Whalefall is set on a fictional island off the coast of Wales in 1938. It's a fictional island, but it's based on a few islands that existed around the British Isles in reality. We might talk about that a bit later. And it focuses on a young woman who lives on the island, has grown up on the island, and the arrival of two researchers who have come to study the island and its way of life and its folk tales and its kind of customs and things. And it's about this young woman's relationship with those visitors and, yeah, sort of what happens to her.
And it's absolutely brilliant. I finished it this week. I loved it.
Oh, thank you very much.
These chaps have bought their third copy of it today.
Oh, how cool!
And there's a note in the back about the islands that it's inspired by.
Yeah.
How did you sort of discover the story of these islands, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. It was a while ago. I think it started with. So I was doing my PhD, and that was in about how poets wrote about the coast and coastal communities in the early 20th century. And I became interested in that because I had a bit of like family connection to the coast, especially the North Welsh coast and the West Irish coast. So I was reading a lot about coastal communities in the 20th century that these poets had written about. And then I came across, can't remember which would have been the first, maybe like Bardsey Island or the Blasket Islands, which were islands that were either like formally evacuated, like were told by, oh, hello. It's always funny when you see someone, you know, the corner of your eye. So we're either kind of told that they had to evacuate the island and live somewhere else, or kind of were informally depopulated. You know, the younger generations would move to the mainland looking for kind of better opportunities because it was becoming more modernised there. And then I think through my reading, I found other examples. So St Kilda. Yeah. And the Aran Islands a little bit, which haven't been depopulated. They're thriving nowadays. But yeah, it was just reading and then discovering that way.
Oh, brilliant. The note in the back about those islands is the evacuations is brutal. There's a sentence in there about how they drowned all the working dogs, and I was just like,
yeah, it was crazy. And it's funny because even like now the novel's out, I'm still finding examples of these islands, or people like come and tell me about them. And there was one that really struck me that was an Irish island. I can't remember the name of now, but that was formerly evacuated, and they were given kind of a village, a settlement on the mainland to live in instead. But from the village, they could still see the island. And they were in this account was saying how a lot of these islanders like blocked the windows in some
Oh,
way
that's
because they
horrible.
didn't
Yeah.
want to be able to see it because that so affected them. So there's so many kind of untold stories about these islands
Yeah.
that still kind of seem to come up in different ways and anecdotally and things.
Yeah, not to get too heavy too
No,
quickly. But
no.
I don't know anything about the evacuations and that sort of thing. Or is it? Do you look at it as a sort of form of like state violence? You know how like Tryweryn was flooded to provide the reservoir for Liverpool and Wales. Is it the same kind of thing, or is it?
I think it depends a little bit. There are definitely some examples where it is that. So there's a novel called Clear by Caris Davies, which some of you might have come across, which is a similar thing of Scottish islands being evacuated in the 19th century. And that was very much the people who owned the land clearing it because it was more profitable for it to be used for like agriculture. And sheep, and so that was a really violent like clearing of people who lived there for profit. The island examples I found generally were more about the fact the islands were becoming quite dangerous to live on. So like the Blasket Islands, it was this concern that the population was aging because the younger generations were all moving. And the weather was changing a lot. And so they were basically becoming kind of increasingly cut off. And it was this kind of older and becoming more vulnerable population.
So the young would sort of move off to the mainland and you'd just be left with older people there.
Exactly, yeah. And then, tides kind of changing and weather changing. And so it would be difficult for people to travel between the mainland and the island. So that was more reflection of that, which I think is really interesting when nowadays we're kind of reading with this backdrop of climate change and islands becoming uninhabitable in that way, in sort of the global south. And
and you hear about how like a lot of people are fortunate enough to be able to be like, oh, I don't care about climate change, but they say that it's going to hit like the worst off first.
The poorest first.
But you do a great job in the book of showing the different sides of the people who live there in terms of like, wanting to leave to go to the mainland because there isn't much of a future for young people there. Things like Manod's mother saying the only job for a woman is wife and that kind of thing. So you do a good job of making it look like the sort of grey area that it is, because it would be very easy to just be like, excuse me, the bloody English. You know what I mean? And I thought that came across really well.
Thank you. I think that came from as well. So I talked a bit about having family connection. And so I was thinking a lot about why they would have moved and the fact that, like for my grandmother, especially coming from this quite isolated fishing community in North Wales, there wouldn't have, like there was only kind of one kind of life she could have had there, and that actually making that decision to move for herself and for a future, but also the ties of like, well, you're leaving your family and you're leaving this very particular culture that so kind of the two sides of that. And
that's quite a common rural kind of experience. We might have Professor Brad Evans in. Hopefully, have you read his book?
I haven't. No, I know
great.
of it.
How Black Was My Valley, which is about the mining communities and his experience growing up there. And one of the things that he was always told was, "There's no future for you in the valleys. You have to leave." But obviously, that's true of Scotland, of Ireland, of everywhere.
Lots of places.
One of the things I noticed. It might not have been like. Is it weird? I'll ask this up front. Is it weird having written a book and then having lots of people come up to you being like, "Oh, the book is about this. The book is about that"? Because I'm guilty. I'm going to be guilty of it myself.
No, I love it.
I just wanted to ask if that's weird up front.
No, I love it, and I love it when people say things that I just have not thought of at all, and especially when some people have like these really detailed theories about things that happen. No, I love it. It's not weird.
It's just a sign that it's got a lot to it, and there's a lot going on.
That's nice. And that people, it's nice when, I don't know, people read really generously and think you're more clever than you are and they find these things.
one of the things that struck me was there's kind of an anti-nationalism to it. I don't know if that's accurate, but in terms of like, it's very easy to go very anti-English in a book about Wales, especially when the English are visiting and doing that kind of thing. And there's the Welsh independence movement. I've got friends in Wales. I'm Welsh, so if I slag Wales off at all, then please, I'm allowed. I've got lots of friends back home who are very nationalist and that kind of thing. And a lot of the rhetoric around Welsh independence revolves around anti-English sentiment, especially. They've got a few talking points they always use, like Tryweryn and the Welsh Not and that kind of thing. And absolutely fair enough. But they do kind of weaponize history in the same way that... and one of the things I loved about your book is that the people on the island are also separate from mainland Wales as well.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to like flatten everybody and just be like, here are the Welsh, here are the English. But your islanders' experience of Welshness is completely different from a mainlander's experience of Welshness.
Yeah.
And is the kind of Welsh nationalism, independence movement kind of thing something that was at the back of your mind while you were writing, in terms of like, people might take this the wrong way, or people who are very, flag waving Welsh people might be disappointed with the portrayal of different kinds of Welshness, because these movements tend to flatten nationalities into one experience, don't they?
I hadn't thought about that, and it's really interesting to hear about that reading. I think I was coming at it with an interest in Welshness and the Welsh language, I guess from family, and like they always talk about like the Welsh Not, and even things like when my grandmother moved to England and her brothers moved with her, and they all chose English names, or were kind of given English names because people were always like, they had very, very Welsh names, and it was seen as like people couldn't pronounce them. So I kind of had that in my mind. I think like the anti-nationalism side, I came in from a slightly different direction, because I was interested in, because the novels, for me as a writer, so much about nature and like our relationship to nature, and I was interested in that period of history, how landscape was kind of weaponized in fascism, and especially like working people who worked with the land, so like this kind of blood of the land type,
return to the land,
exactly, kind of narrative, and how people would have interacted with that and with this very kind of remote landscape in that historical period. So I think I came at it through that direction.
Is that what made you decide to set it then during the rise of Nazism? And
no, I think what I set it then, so I did try a few different periods, and there was like a couple of drafts that I did that were like modern day, telling the story from contemporary point of view. But what I was so I've been reading about these islands, and a lot of the kind of narratives came from the first half of the 20th century, of these islands, kind of, which makes sense. I think the interwar period was this kind of huge push for modernization and people moving around, and so it felt like it suited that story that I wanted to tell, and I also felt that it setting it just before the Second World War kind of dramatized that unease that islanders would have felt with this kind of feeling of their home changing quite drastically, maybe becoming somewhere they're unable to live long term. And then going back to what I was saying at the start about how with our own backdrop of climate change, we've kind of got that similar feeling of constant unease that we're kind of living with. I think now, it was less so when I was writing the book, but now we've kind of got this backdrop of war that may be around the corner. So I felt that setting kind of lent this kind of, it enabled me to stage that feeling of unease that would have been around for these islanders. And,
it properly adds a whole extra layer to the novel. It's brilliant. It
was useful narratively as well to kind of have that thing that almost propelled the narrative forward. And it's always nice, I think, as a reader when kind of something the characters don't. So it was nice as a writer to kind of play with, as a reader, we know what's coming, but the characters don't necessarily.
The Alfred Hitchcock thing of putting a bomb under the table and then watching two people sit down.
Yeah, exactly.
You've used a lot of the Welsh language in the book as well. Can you talk a little bit about why you thought that was important? And I love that you did that.
Sure. So again, I mean, I was really interested in the Welsh language, again, from family. So it was their first language. And then my grandmother learned English in her 20s when she moved. And so in my relationship with her, she often talked about like the differences between Welsh and English, the kind of struggle of translating your own thoughts in your head. And like, she'd always talk about how she would think in Welsh and then have to kind of translate her thoughts into English.
Right. And there are some words that don't
match. And for her as well, so she spoke a kind of dialect from where she was from. And it was this fishing community, so there were lots of like little words for like a particular kind of cliff or a particular tide, or and so I wanted to think about that as well, like because we don't really have that kind of language in English beyond kind of very scientific language. We don't have like an ordinary language that really pays attention to the details of a landscape. So I was interested in that as well. And
it's lovely to just sort of see it on the page and sound it out, and it's, I don't know, it's it adds something. When I read a writing instructional article at one point where someone was very firmly arguing against ever cutting out dialogue that your character says, because it's like their view was it's important to always hear the words your main character is speaking, so never just sort of summarize, just
that's
say
interesting.
other things, which is one way of doing it. There's loads of others, but I thought it was interesting that you get to hear the actual words that they would be saying here and there, which, I don't know, it's sort of a bit pretentious maybe, but I think it says something about their character when you can hear the actual words that they would have been speaking.
No, I like that. I've never thought of it like that before. That's really cool.
I don't speak Welsh myself very well. But it's interesting because it's my dad's first language, and he has the same sort of thing. He grew up on a farm, so he has this kind of, he calls it Pidgin Welsh, where I'd go to him with Welsh homework from school and he wouldn't understand a word of it. Because
that's interesting.
This sort of very formal Welsh, and he says he wouldn't be able to speak to someone from South Wales because they have different dialects to the point where it's almost a different language.
That's really interesting.
Which is a very weird situation, and especially, you know, for your family as well. The idea that you wouldn't be able to speak to your, like my grandfather never spoke English. And I never met him, but I would never be able to speak to him if I did meet him, because I don't speak the same
really
language.
Interesting.
It's kind of moving away from the rural kind of thing. Sorry, I'm rambling on.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Generally, though, just really excited to see the Welsh language in a book, and especially one that's about Welsh people. And do you feel a lot of pressure writing about people whose voices aren't heard very often, in terms of like these small communities who won't have writers who publish?
Definitely. And I think I was really conscious of the fact I was writing about that community, like not being from an island community. And I think that's always really tricky as a writer, because obviously you can't just always write about someone in their 30s from Birmingham. Like that can't be every single novel. So yeah, it's something I was trying to be really careful with, and definitely was definitely on my mind.
Did you sort of use your family as a resource and that kind of thing? And
yeah, and also a lot of so luckily a lot of the there are a few island like biographies that autobiographies, always get those two mixed up, autobiographies by islanders who lived on some of the islands that I was using as inspiration from that time, or like a few years before. So that was great because I felt I could understand not just like the material conditions of their lives, like what they ate and what they wore and what they had in their house, but also like how they felt and what it was like what their memories would be of an island and how that would shape them. So those were a really lovely resource for like to really get to know an islander on a personal level and then use it.
And that's one of the things I loved about the book as well, is we do a lot of local history stuff in the library here, and a lot of local history stuff tends to boil down to this shop used to be here, that shop used to be there, oh, wasn't it nice in the 60s, that sort of thing. And you just sort of, a lot of it is geographical, and it's just kind of photographs of shop fronts and that kind of thing. Do you see fiction as having a role in history in terms of fleshing out what people's internal lives would have been like?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I think fiction can do that. And I think that's kind of, for me, like reading historical fiction, that's always the most interesting part of it. And the kind of small everyday details, which is kind of, as you say, it's not really what you get in history books. It tends to be sort of the bigger events. And I also think it's good, and what I'd like to see more of is when historical fiction kind of moves away from like the famous players of history and looking at like ordinary people and what their lives and what their interior lives would have been, who again kind of don't have a presence often in kind of history books, but also sometimes local records. Like when we tried to, one of my aunts tried to do kind of family genealogy thing, we like couldn't really get past my grandfather, her father, because he was in rural Ireland and there were just no records at all.
Anytime you get to Ireland, it's just you're scuppered.
Exactly. So there's these kind of swathes of people who just are kind of unknown, unnamed, who would have lived as rich a life as we do now.
My wife's a history teacher, and she read Haley Rubinold's The Five, the Jack the Ripper victims, which was all from the point of view of the victims, and she was delighted again for the same reasons of, you know, how many books do you need about Jack the Ripper?
No, it's true.
It's interesting to see it from the point of view of the people who normally just get written off as statistics or that sort of thing. Can I ask, how did you come to write a novel in the first place? What's your sort of writing journey like? Because you've had short stories published before.
So I think so. I studied English quite academically, and then did my PhD and wanted to be an English academic, but actually found that I was quite interested in creative writing more than academic writing. I've always like read a lot, and so I started playing around with some short fiction, and then a couple of my short stories were published, and then it kind of went from there really. So I had some agents contact me from the short stories, who, when I finished the novel, that took me a few years, but I could then send it to them directly rather than, because it can be really hard, like just doing the submissions process. So I was really lucky in that sense that I kind of bypassed that. So that bit was relatively smooth, really. Although I found the writing and figuring out how to write really, really hard. And still am. Like, I'm trying to do my second novel at the moment, and it's still
brilliant.
just so difficult. I feel like I've got no idea what I'm doing, but yeah.
So you used your short fiction as sort of like a calling card for agents?
Yeah, without meaning to, really. So it's now kind of the advice I would give, because I kind of did it by accident and it worked really well, was I mean, I kind of just sent short stories out because I wanted a measure of like whether they were any good. I didn't really know what to do with them. But I thought, if I could get them accepted somewhere, then I'd know there was something good about them. So I just started doing that quite randomly and sending to competitions as well. And then that ended up being a really good way to, as you say, have a calling card, meet agents, and then go from there.
Oh, that's brilliant, because you don't hear that sort of path very often.
No, but I think it's a good way to do it. Yeah.
And I suppose you can sort of try different things in short stories. Yeah,
exactly. That's what I liked about them. Yeah, try out different forms, try out different voices, different characters, different historical periods, and kind of see what you like writing and what works well for you. And
was that tricky at first, trying to sort of figure out what kind of genre you would write in and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And still it is, really. Like, I think with every project you start, like, you go through that process again of like, well, is this a historical novel, or is this better as a contemporary novel, or is this should this have like surreal elements, or should it be really contained, or should it be expansive, or so you kind of go through the process, I think, every time.
What was the trickiest thing for you about writing your first novel in terms of moving from short stories?
Definitely plot, I think, was the thing I really struggled with. I think short stories are a lot more forgiving. Well, they're more forgiving with structure, in that like less can happen. But obviously, like, you have to fill it out in other ways. But I always struggle with plot and sort of what can happen and what would happen. So that was definitely the most challenging thing.
That seems mad, because Whalefall seems so natural and progressive
That's
so
good.
naturally.
But I think that came from a lot of tearing my hair out at my computer.
Is that frustrating, that people will just read it and it reads beautifully and you're just like, that took ages?
No, it's nice. It makes me think it was worth it. Good. Like, all the effort was worth it.
Can I ask what your second novel is going to be?
So I'm writing it at the moment. I'm really interested generally in like writing about nature and animals, particularly. And I became really interested in like dog shows as a very kind of domesticated way that we engage with nature and animals. And I wrote a short story that was set at a dog show, and just really enjoyed it, really enjoyed that world, and the kind of eccentricities of it, but also how it kind of shows this really unique relationship that we have to a particular kind of animal, which I think is really fascinating. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Brilliant. What sort of stage are you at with it, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm at a stage where I work in a slightly funny way, where I don't really do drafts. I do what you're not supposed to do, which is edit as you go along, and then by the time I get to the end, I'm kind of finished. So I'm about halfway through in that, in that sense. But,
do you just find that an easier way to work?
I think so, and I don't know if it comes from that thing of finding plot so difficult. So I feel like that's the bit I've got to work out and work through as I go along.
plan in advance, or are you sort of discovering it?
I don't. I've always, as I go along, just sat down and kind of figured out what happens. But I'm kind of moving away from that. I've been speaking to a lot of writers, just like meeting them at events and things, and hearing about other people's ways of doing it. And there are a couple that I quite like that involve planning. So I think for my next project, I'm going to try that. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. It's amazing that there's no sort of one set.
Yeah, so everyone does it so differently. Yeah.
I've listened to a podcast with one author who writes a mystery novel, does the entire first draft, and then will throw it away and start completely again, like typing fresh. And
that's amazing.
Terrifying.
Yeah, that is terrifying.
I was going to ask, there are lots of folk tales and songs in the book. Did you write those yourself, or were they from the research that you did?
They were a bit of both. So they were based on research that I did. So there's a really great online archive of Welsh folk songs and folk stories as part of the St Fagan's Folk Museum in Cardiff. Right. So I used that a lot to find stories and tales, and then I kind of rewrote them slightly. So I was interested in exploring in the book like how those kind of stories reflect a landscape, and especially for a community that lives very closely to the sea, like how they might adapt stock stories or stock songs to reflect their own experiences. So I used those as a basis, and then kind of rewrote them kind of how I thought an islander might tell them. Yeah.
I love the inclusion of them because it just gives you a proper idea of the sense of the community as well.
Nice, and that was the idea.
Parents and grandparents and that kind of thing.
Oh, great,
I was going to ask as well, so your PhD was a study of the poet HD. Could you talk a little bit about that? I'm just interested in how that might have fed into your writing.
Of course. So HD, she was called Hilda Doolittle, but she went by her initials. She was an American poet writing in first half of the 20th century. She started in the kind of same circles as like Ezra Pound. So she lived in London. She's got like a blue plaque, which is nice. And so she wrote a lot of poetry about the coast, but it was very, very layered. So she was really interested in the coast that she grew up with, which was in New Jersey. And her grandfather was a botanist of like seaweed. And so she has a autobiography in which she talks about sort of his research and like looking at his specimens and looking through his microscope. So she writes a lot about the New Jersey coastline with this kind of very detailed botanist's eye. But then she was also a classicist. And so she weaves into these coastal scenes like characters from Greek and Greek myth and Greek literature. So she writes these poems that are kind of very, very scientific, but then also the landscape kind of has these presences of deities and nymphs and gods. And so I just found that combination really fascinating.
That sounds very unique.
Yeah, really unique. And yeah, so I was writing about that and sort of how that linked to, I guess, like how people thought about nature generally at that time, and kind of how nature exists both as kind of an ecological thing, but also like a cultural thing. So in folk stories, in songs, in literature, as metaphor and as a symbol, and kind of the interplay of that.
So was she a big inspiration on the sort of the style?
I think she was. It's funny, I didn't think about it at the time, but I think she is as well, because she was an imagist poet, and imagism was coined by Ezra Pound, and it was this idea that it was inspired by haiku and a lot of short Chinese poetry, where you'd say things basically in as few words as possible.
Oh, okay.
Which I think, my writing style kind of leans towards being quite economical and quite spare. So I think that was quite a big influence as well.
I love that some of the chapters in the book are just sort of short snapshots as well. It feels like it kind of, you get an idea of her whole life just in these little flashes.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Brilliant. And I was going to ask as well, what was the most sort of surprising thing in your publication journey? Did you have much experience of the industry before you published Whaleful?
Absolutely nothing. So it's been a really big learning curve, I think. It's been positive. I think the most surprising thing is, I think I went in quite naively to how competitive it is, and that sometimes you do have to like almost put blinkers on in a way. So for instance, like with writing my second, it's been quite difficult to have, it's that human nature thing where you remember like negative things that have been said to you, and negative reviews or like negative aspects of reviews. And so, there is that feeling of you've kind of got to put blinkers on and almost not engage with the kind of publishing industry in order to actually write. So I think that was the most surprising thing, the fact that, I mean, so many books come out every year. And like, whilst, obviously it's great, and like doing events is always really fun, there is also that kind of underlying competitiveness that you're always kind of trying to not engage with too much.
It must be very scary to go from just sort of writing yourself in a room to then being in national newspapers and
exactly.
on the BBC.
And suddenly you go from like your writing the first novel, I was very much just kind of indulging my own interests and writing it how I would like to write, and not really even thinking that there would be an end product. And so going from that to, you've got a book kind of out in the public world, and then you're writing another book knowing that's also going to go out into the public world, is like suddenly a very different way of writing.
It must be very different writing now that Sir Trevor MacDonald has reviewed your book on TV.
Exactly.
That must be terrifying. But he was lovely about it.
He was lovely about it. Yeah.
And Yara Greyjoy from Game of Thrones loved it as well,
exactly. That was very cool.
So did you do you have any advice for people who would like to publish their first novel, in terms of how to get started, where to get feedback, that kind of thing?
I mean, I think my like general advice is just advice that I still give myself, which is that writing a novel is really hard, and you've got to not give up and believe in your ideas, and kind of, so long as you really are believing in your novel, you kind of just got to go with it and keep going. In terms of practical advice, I mean, what I was saying before about using short stories as a way to like gain a bit of a presence online, and even as a way to like meet people, you'll be emailing with people editing your work, or writers might follow you on social media if they've read stuff you've written online. And also it's a way, as I say, to like try out your ideas and kind of see how they work.
Because quite often people will, there's not a lot of talk about short stories when it comes to seeking agents and that sort of thing. So for a lot of people, they'll write their first novel, and then that will be the first time they get feedback after they've written 100,000 words. And
it's
if
true.
it's not good feedback, that's a lot of time that's gone into that.
It's true. But even if you don't have short stories and you just have a novel manuscript, I mean, there are competitions for novel manuscripts, or like I know the Stinging Fly will like publish extracts from novels in lieu of short stories. So there are ways to kind of still just get things out there through ways that kind of anyone can do it. I mean, the difficult thing is that these things you often have to pay for, and that's always a real barrier. But there are free opportunities as well. So it's kind of, seeing where you can send stuff and
just get it out there.
Just try and get it out there as much as you can. Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you. Does anybody have any questions at all for Elizabeth? Sorry, I pounced on you then. Really.
What do you think of the change of cover?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have anything to do with the cover choices? And what do you think of the change between the hardback and the paperback?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So the hardback is very different. It's, oh no, that's the new one. It's like kind of a soft pink. Oh yeah, we've got a. Yeah, so it's very like soft. And thank you. And then they changed it quite drastically for the paperback. I was lucky that I was quite involved with the cover choices, which was nice. This was the first paperback cover they showed me, and I just thought it was great, so we didn't go through much of a process with this one. For the hardback cover, that was quite a long process. There were quite a few options that we went through before landing on that one, and it was really nice that I got to be involved with that. I think with the change, so we had a conversation about the hardback cover and the fact that a lot of book covers nowadays are like very colourful and quite pigmented, and if you go into a bookshop, like, I mean, I hadn't really noticed it, but after that conversation I went into a bookshop and it was like, like everyone's got really brightly coloured covers, and so my publishers were wondering if the hardback was like getting a bit lost on shelves, which again, I went into a bookshop and I was like, I can see what they, as much as I like love that cover, could see what they meant. So I was happy with this one, and I think it still reflects the novel quite nicely, just in like a different way to the hardback.
So did they do anything, not asking you to badmouth them obviously, but did they,
very conscious of the camera.
I'm sorry. But did you have to sort of change anything for publication, in terms of like, did they have suggestions for titles and that sort of thing?
They did have suggestions for titles. They were quite keen to so this is the original title that we ended up keeping, but they were quite keen to change the title, which I would have been happy to do, but we just couldn't think of one that I liked as much. I think they wanted to change it because they felt it was like quite confusing to say, which not to say, like if you hear someone saying it, which I do get, because I do sometimes say, if someone hasn't heard of the novel and I'm talking about it, I do kind of get people going, what's it called? Like, because I don't know, it's kind of a lot of soft sounds, I suppose. So that was interesting, but anyway, we ended up with the original one. In terms of the novel itself, not a lot changed. It was interesting shopping it around publishers, because quite a few publishers wanted me to like double the length. They didn't like that it was a short novel, and they felt it'd be hard to sell. Some agents I spoke to as well said that, which is interesting. At the time I was like really set on that being the complete thing, so that stayed the same, and then there were a couple, I'm trying to remember what we did change. There were a couple of small things, but they're quite tiny. I think the ending changed. It was a lot more ambiguous before. It's still quite ambiguous, I think, but even more so before. I think that was it. The odd thing in the novel. The stage I found really interesting, actually, of the editing was there's a proofreader that reads through it, and obviously that's for like spelling and grammar. But they also look for like inconsistencies. which I found really interesting. So they look for like historical inaccuracies or
right.
like using the wrong word, or they'll say things like, like this person has walked into the room twice in one scene. And so I found that stage really interesting and quite embarrassing as well for how many little mistakes like that there were.
That must be quite hard for them to check with things like, because your setting's so unique and far away.
That's why it was so amazing to me that they were like, I think there was something about, I used a word like vest, and then they were like, actually, I think it'd be called a jerkin at this point in time. I don't know, all random tiny little details. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Would you ever like to see it made into a film or a TV series?
That would be great. Yeah. So we have sold the film rights.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, to a Irish production company. It's the language, I get confused. I think it's an Irish production. It's got a Welsh producer behind it now.
Yeah.
But I think the people who have the rights are an Irish film company. I need to learn the correct language to describe it. But yeah, so I think the script's currently being written. And
that's incredible, because it's so visual as well that it would make a perfect film.
I'd love to see it as a film.
Get Michael Sheen in as
absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Are you writing the script?
No, I'm not. No. I would have been interested in it actually, but I had a meeting with the team, and the person they've got on to write it was so great and so cool. I was like, yeah, I'm glad she's doing it, not me. Yeah, she's brilliant.
Are you excited to see sort of what they do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be really fun.
Yeah, because it must be exciting to just the idea of seeing your characters on a screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And like even like the inside of the house and things that I have a really clear picture of in my head, but it'd be interesting to see how it differs.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions at all?
Hi, Elizabeth. Can I ask you a question about story ideas, follow-up?
Yeah, of course.
You find at any one time you've got like a whole bunch of story ideas, and you, like you said, your second novel, you sort of pick one and you go, right, well, okay, so that becomes my second project. Or is it more sort of like linear, I finish a project and then I'm going to go into, the next one? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely quite overlapping, I'd say. So I have like documents on my computer that I will add ideas to. So I have a document that's like a list of possible ideas, and then once I kind of think of a bit more depth or a bit more detail, it'll get its own document, and then I'll start putting more things in. So at the moment I'm writing book 2, but I started that while writing Wailfall, and then book 3 has got stuff in its own document now as well. I find having ideas is like the easy bit. It's the actually doing something with that idea that's the hard bit. But yeah, so kind of very overlapping, and I'm hoping it'll carry on like that. We'll see if I run out ever.
Do you have any sort of places or subjects that you would be interested in tackling in the future?
Yeah, so I think I don't know if anyone saw, there was an exhibition at the Barber Institute of Fine Art in Birmingham about celebrity animals and celebrity throughout a few centuries. So the Barber in its collection has an iron cast of a rhinoceros called Clara, who came to Belgium, was taken from the wild quite horribly, and came and put on display throughout Europe in like the 1700s. And then there was also an orangutan, similarly taken from the wild, and was on display in Victorian London as kind of a entertainment thing. And Miss Clara's claim to fame is not Miss Clara. Miss Jenny was the orangutan, and her claim to fame was that Darwin visited her quite a lot when he was writing Origin of the Species. So I was interested in that, these kind of animals that have gone on display.
So like the equivalent of like the Russian circus bears. And
Yeah,
that kind of thing. It's all
exactly.
abusive and horrible and.
Yeah. So that's my like document for book 3, just collecting anything I come across that might be interesting, or like books that cover similar things that I can reread. And
Brilliant. Who are some of, if you don't mind me asking, who are some of your influences for Whalefall in terms of your writing style and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I really like a writer called Elisa Shua Duasprin. I never know if I'm saying her name right, but she's a Korean writer. And yeah, she's really great, and she has this really beautiful style that's very spare, but has like a lot of emotional depth. A lot of Irish writers as well. I really love Donal Ryan and Claire Keegan, who similarly write quite kind of short chapters and short sections, short scenes. So people like that would be the main ones.
Oh, thank you very much. Anybody else have any questions at all? No, that's okay. But thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
And Claire is here with books for sale at the end. If anybody would like to buy a book and get it signed. But thank you so much.
Sounds good.
That was brilliant.
You're welcome. Thank you.